Hello, my name is Emmy DeGrappa. Each week, we bring you stories asking our guests the question why. We learn about passion, purpose, and the human experience. Brought to you by Wyoming Humanities with the generous support of the Wyoming Community Foundation. This is What's Your Why? Today, we are talking to Fred Schmechel. Fred serves as the Assistant Director of Impact 307, Wyoming's state network of innovative business incubators. He has helped launch more than 100 innovative companies across the state. Welcome, Fred.
Hi, thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us and taking the time. We just want to get to know you, and so the first thing I want to ask you is, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Cheyenne.
Oh, you did grow up in Cheyenne.
I did grow up in Cheyenne, born and raised. I've spent most of my life here in Southeast Wyoming. There's a semester in Bozeman that we don't talk about, but the rest of the time I've been very fortunate to be here in the southeast corner of the state.
Well, and I think that's interesting because you have followed your passion in a very big way. As I was reading your biography. And one of the things I did read, which I thought was incredibly interesting, is that you started out in sculpting. You were a sculptor. You were a trained sculptor.
I am, yeah.
And so are you still sculpting?
Mostly I'm sculpting companies these days. I don't get a chance to make a whole lot of art. I really love doing cast metal work, which is very difficult to do when you're on your own. And I haven't had a chance to get back into a UW class here lately to dedicate some time to that. But I'm hopeful I'll get back to it here sooner rather than later.
And so you have a double degree. Is one in graphic design and one is a sculpting major? So
my two degrees, my undergraduate degree is in art. And then I have a master's in public administration. As I like to call them, hippie and bureaucrat.
That's perfect.
And it's just a straight line from hippie to bureaucrat to working as a capitalist is the usual joke here.
Well, I think all artists should work as capitalists.
I do too. I mean, it's important to Wyoming and our creativity that we be able to sustain our artists, and artists need to find a way to make sustainable living, and it's entirely possible to do here in Wyoming.
And were you making a living as a sculptor?
I was not. My path was always headed down an arts administration role. I just have always enjoyed sculpting. I love the fact that it's a whole body experience. It's not just art made by moving your wrist. It takes the whole body to get into a piece of sculpture and to communicate something. So yeah, I was always looking towards an admin job of some kind, working in a museum or something like that.
And how long have you been working for Impact 307? And tell us a little bit more about that organization.
So I started with Impact 307 in September of 2010, which officially makes me the old guy at this point. We used to be called the Wyoming Technology Business Center, but we were able to rebrand here this past summer. Very fortunately, because the acronym was just a mouthful. Because really we were the University of Wyoming's Wyoming Technology Business, or those back-to-back Wyomings. We are awesome enough to warrant two Wyomings in our name, but it's still really awkward. Always like to point out that my mother, I've been with the incubator for more than a decade at this point, and she still couldn't get the acronym right. So that was part of the reason why we desired to have the change. And I'm thankful to report that she was able to choose Impact 307 from a list that we gave her, and fortunately everyone agreed. So I tell people that my mother, in fact, rebranded Impact 307.
Right. She was the tiebreaker.
She was.
And in Impact 307, how are you making an impact in Wyoming?
So we get to help people start companies. We keep talking about economic diversification in the state. And in my office, we actually get to do something about it rather than just having these conversations. We get to work with UW students, LCCC students, and other community college students or general members of the public that see a problem that they want to solve and develop into a business. And we get to help them do that. most people have this perception you have to have a business background in order to start a company, when the reality is that as much as I love the College of Business here at the University of Wyoming, they're a fantastic program, but they finally caught up to the music department and the number of entrepreneurs that have come through our program here just this last year. It's the people that are problem solvers, the people that are able to look beyond their own needs and the needs of others, show some empathy. They're the ones that are starting companies that are lasting and making large impacts on other people's lives in order to move things forward.
So just describe a couple of those companies so I can get a sense of exactly what that means.
Oh my. So in the entire history of the incubator, we've launched 198 companies is what I've come up with just the other day counting. So our 200th company will be coming soon. A couple of them. One of our big successes here in Laramie is a company called Bright Agritech. This is a company that did vertical hydroponic farms where the towers are vertical. They were ultimately acquired by a Silicon Valley company called Plenty that has since raised several $100 million in equity from people like Jeff Bezos, the founder of Google, and other wealthy, notorious people, to put 500 farms in the 500 largest cities around the world to give people farm fresh produce that uses a tenth of the water, if that much, to develop them. And it's on a much smaller footprint. They still have a significant presence here in Laramie with a large number of employees over at their West Laramie facility. And it includes companies. We just had one. We had a startup challenge called the Southeast Wyoming Innovation Launchpad that launched a company called Frosty Flake. That's a service company for snowplow drivers and snow removal companies so that they know when it actually starts snowing, as opposed to waking up every couple hours in the middle of the night to see if the weatherman got it right. Because the answer is he didn't. So it lets them get a full night's sleep, lets their spouse get a full night's sleep as well. That's certainly worth having, and a reason to buy the app is to make sure that the home life is happy because they're not getting woken up every 2 hours, so you can look out the window.
And how do you pick? I mean, I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs come to you to get help. Mm-hmm. How do you decide who is going to move forward in your program?
So it's mostly self-selection for our entrepreneurs. We now work statewide. We just got a large federal grant in order to do that here related to the CARES Act. But we take all of our entrepreneurs through a process called Lean Launchpad. It starts with problem solving, identifying that problem. And we work through it trying to develop a pitch deck to help these companies explain what they're going to be doing and have this concept of what their business is going to be. Typically, the people that don't move forward, they tend to self-select out because they find the process of validating their premises and their problem that they're thinking they're solving is actually what they want to solve. They tend to self-select out in order to do that. So if you can make it through that process and being honest with yourself and being coachable, that's really how we move forward with all these companies.
Well, what is the process?
So it's called Lean Launchpad. It's a well-known industry standard that's been out for years and years. A guy named Steve Blank invented the name Lean Launchpad and actually wrote it down as a process. It starts with what problem are you trying to solve, and then describing your product or service, then focusing in on who might be your best customer, and then a market question, meaning how many customers like that are out there. If you want to start a hot dog stand and it turns out that hot dogs are a $16 billion a year industry, you're not going to claim a market percentage of $16 billion. You're going to set up on the corner of 3rd and Grand here in Laramie and say that you can sell 500 hot dogs in a week. That second number is what we're looking for, not the $16 billion market. We want to know what you can actually address. And it goes from there. So there's 10 different points. We go through developing what a cash flow might look like, which is a tool that we use. It's an Excel spreadsheet that's kind of complicated, but it looks more scary than it actually is. And that helps us determine for these companies what actual steps they have to go through in order to be successful and to make the level of money that they want to make to do it.
And how do these entrepreneurs find out about Impact 307? Are they at UW? Where do they come from?
So they come from all over. We have centers in Laramie, Casper, and Sheridan at the moment. We are working with the 7 community colleges at this point to bring startup challenges across the state as part of this federal grant that I just mentioned. So be looking on the lookout for notices in your community that there might be a startup challenge coming. We're also working on a few concepts for some statewide concepts. We think that there might be some strong partnership out there around a nonprofit side of the equation here in Wyoming. That we're highly optimistic for. So social media, we're all over it, or at least try to be. We focus a lot on press releases. Casper and Sheridan, we have found that they're very much radio listening communities, so we advertise on there as well. But really, impact307.org is our website, and that's where to find the most information possible about what we do and how to get a hold of us. The good news is, if you reach out to one of us and we're not the right person, we will put you in touch with the person who is.
What are your thoughts about economic diversification in Wyoming?
Well, I have a few, as you might have mentioned, being a decade into this. The one is that it's incredibly hopeful for me. My job is to kind of fall in love with the Wyoming we're going to build before we've built it, and it's a very fun job to have. I get to work with some incredibly innovative and talented young people. We often decide that we need to do things to keep our young people in the state, and then we never seem to involve our young people. And entrepreneurship and working through our universities and our community colleges, this is a great way where we can engage these young people to help them make their own opportunities here and understand that they have that kind of access. I remember being in the 4th grade at Henderson Elementary with Jim Landon as my teacher, and him talking about, we need economic diversification in the state of Wyoming. And this is 30 some years ago. And I remember thinking at that moment, and the legislature should do something about it. As it turns out, the people we're looking for need to be coachable. They need to be problem solvers. They need to have some empathy behind them. They need to be willing to explore new ideas and validate their premises. And these are traits we typically identify with 10-year-olds more than we may identify with legislators. So really, the answer turns out to be more in 4th graders than it does the responsibility of the legislators. So it's incredibly hopeful at the moment, I think, that there is a possibility for our young people to build a future in Wyoming of their own making.
Well, that is a challenge, probably at the legislative level, because there's so many other things that they deal with as well as that. And how would you have them embrace economic diversification?
So the legislature's role in this is making sure that all of the infrastructure is there. So there's a tremendous program that just came about here in this last year from Wyoming Workforce Services and their Workforce Development Training Fund. It's an internship program that will reimburse some costs for hiring a Wyoming-based student, high school, community college, or university student, and placing them with a small startup company, and finding ways to continue supporting that program and making sure that there are programs like it out there that can help these companies get up off the ground and engage our young people, I think is highly important. I think that we need to re-examine how we're paying for the state. Right now, I think that we are, sunk costs into creating jobs versus bringing jobs to Wyoming is pretty drastic in their difference. We need to find ways to make sure that we're recouping those costs as a state. And I don't have the answer for what all of our revenue problems are going to be. But I suspect that, like all companies that I counsel, they need to have a diverse line of income coming in. You don't just sell one product. You sell multiple products. You find multiple ways of making money. And I think the state really needs to embrace that. And we can't just go off of what we used to do. We actually have to go out and validate that what we've been doing is still the right thing to do. And I think a lot of the anxiety that we feel in Wyoming is coming from the fact that we're starting to realize that maybe what we've been doing is not what the market is actually saying we should be doing at this point.
Well, and And thinking about yourself as an artist, how are you helping artists succeed? How are you helping to sustain our creative economy?
So the creative economy is so linked into what I do. It's all about creating cultures of innovation and creativity. Theater companies are a great bellwether of how innovative a community is. The USDA came out with some research here a few years ago that directly tied the number of theater companies in a community to the number of patents that community produced. The number of patents that community produces, the more jobs that company is going to produce, or companies are going to produce that'll create more jobs. So they're incredibly linked. And the simple fact is that people that are in the more technical industries, the STEM fields, they are much more likely to engage in the arts than those who are not in STEM fields. So they want to live in places that have tremendous arts culture. They want to live in communities that are embracing of creativity and originality, and that aren't just built into the stereotypes of what we expect for these small communities. I think that lots of resistance that we get from communities in Wyoming to change is that we don't want to lose what we already have. And the answer is fantastic. We don't want to lose what we have either. But what are we doing to preserve what we have? I live here in Laramie, and what I love about this town or one of the things I love about this town is the mural project that we have here that is so uniquely and completely tied in what we believe as a community over the past 10 years and helped us define who we are and put those definitions out on display for everyone to see that we value originality and creativity and that we likely have for a very long time. And I think that's an approach that we need to look at in all of our communities in Wyoming, to see what can we do to preserve what we're doing to make sure that as things change, we can continue them.
As you look out into the world and especially study what other communities are doing in the United States or globally even, what do you find as inspiration?
Ooh, good question. It's oftentimes difficult to equate Wyoming to other communities in the nation or even around the world to some extent. I always like to when I go to a conference or something like that, which I haven't been to in a while, but they always talk about rural economic development. And they're talking about, people that live within an hour and a half in Nashville that might own a horse trailer. That's what their definition of rural is. There's probably still 1 million people within an hour and a half. And Wyoming is much more frontier than it is rural when you look at that. So we have to look for ways to stimulate things that aren't actually out there in the rest of the world. Where I find a lot of my inspiration is by working with our young people, the people that haven't had no beaten into them yet. That they can try something bigger. I think that's where I find a lot of my inspiration.
So here's something that just came to my mind, because I like to think of myself as an entrepreneur, and is there any kind of, because it's your program's tied to UW and the community colleges, right?
Yeah.
So how do you have older students, older entrepreneurs, people who have lived and want to do something that they've always wanted to do? Do you have those kinds of people that enter into your programs?
We absolutely do. Our startup challenges are a great way for those people to get in. So startup challenge is taking a group of people through this lean launchpad process I was describing earlier, and helping them build a pitch deck, helping them build the confidence to give this pitch deck. And there's typically a cohort of 5 or so companies that ultimately make it through to the finals. They will pitch typically on a theater stage if we can, especially in Sheridan. Sheridan at the Wyo Theater, they love coming out to support their audience up there. Casper, we do it at the Lyric, and with So Ill, we did it at the Atlas Theater here this last year. Getting them engaged there, then they go before a panel of judges, and then they usually have a pool of award money that the judges can give out. And it usually starts at least around $25,000 for our smallest ones. Sheridan, I believe, is up around $100,000. Casper's around 65, and Cheyenne, we just did 50 here less than a couple weeks ago to help these companies start up. We target between $20,000 and $25,000 to help these companies get up and running. We find that that's a very effective number in helping a company get up off the ground. It's not prize money. You can't take the money and go on a staff vacation to Honolulu for your board meeting or what have you. There's milestones that go along with it that you have to meet in order to get all of it, or so that you're staying on track. But that's all determined by the companies that we work with, and finding what fits for them to make them successful and move forward.
Well, just on a more personal level, in terms of going back to your work as an artist, is there a reason you didn't do this for yourself?
One, I didn't know about it. I started 10 years ago as an intern here for the WTBC as a graphic design intern. My degrees were art history because that's where I thought the job was, sculpture because that's where I was passionate about it, and graphic design because I've always enjoyed eating and living indoors. And one of them ultimately paid off. But I started as the graphics intern and worked my way up through several different levels to get where I'm at today. And I never really thought in depth about how to go about. And I think that's one of the challenges that artists in particular face. We get caught up in the meaning of the object more than we get into the idea of how do we make something that also appeals to someone else that we can get paid for. I think that we can make great art, and we can also make great art and make a living. I don't think that those things are mutually exclusive. I have worked with a few artists over the years. We have one that's a photographer here in Laramie. He is a fine artist. Absolutely. That's what his passion is. And he's found that if he spends a few weekends a year shooting photography for weddings, that he's then able to afford the rest of the art that he wants to make. So he's working 20 days a year basically as a wedding photographer, so that he can work the other 345 as a fine art photographer and make that living. And it's a quality living that he lives, and so he's able to give back to his community. I think that's an equation that we have to make as artists if we're going to dedicate ourselves to our art. Is how do we find a path forward that works for us and doesn't compromise the art, but maybe helps us inform how to make art and what kind of art we have to make in order to be engaging.
Do you think that's a missing link in at the university level for artists who are getting their arts degree, that they don't also take business classes and learn, just the idea of how to be a business and an artist?
Well, it's been a while since I've been an art student at the University of Wyoming, but I do know that they've changed the program significantly since I was there, and the art department itself now includes a art business class of some sort. But I think that having the ability to reach out and have that orthogonal thinking, where I'm an art major, but maybe I take this business class, or maybe I take a chemistry class, so that it can relate back to something. I think that makes us stronger artists in order to do that. I don't know that it's missing. I think it's a personal choice, and I think that there's some intimidation about reaching out beyond art and going into these other topics. I think that's the most important part. I think diversified thinking is our answer.
So, how many brothers and sisters do you have, Fred?
I have an older brother, and I had a younger brother who was my father's cat. So it was the cat that definitely made me the middle child. But Ajax, unfortunately, is no longer with us. Miss him dearly.
Aww.
Yeah. He lived a good solid 15 years. So he was a fun brother to have.
So is your family still in Cheyenne?
My folks are.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think, growing up in Wyoming, what do you find is the most unique, intriguing thing about growing up in Wyoming?
Oh, the most unique. I love the fact that no matter what community I go to, chances are I likely know somebody there. And so you're never alone in Wyoming if you choose to be. It's such a wonderful opportunity to meet great people from all across the state, and get connected with them and see how your life matters and comes in contact with theirs. I think that's a wonderful connection that we have that I think that is missed in some larger places that are even more densely populated. Have that connection. The running joke is it's not 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, it's 3 degrees of Fred Schmechel.
3 degrees.
As my colleagues in our Laramie office who were not born in Wyoming like to say. So,
how has the pandemic changed your business and your work?
It's dramatically changed it. So I won't say I call it live at work, not work from home, because it is very invasive into my life here, as one might imagine. I think lots of people are feeling that. But we've discovered that we can do this pretty effectively via Zoom calls and email and whatnot, and stay on top of things. Our most recent Southeast Wyoming Innovation Launchpad, I have yet to meet any of these entrepreneurs face to face. I was able to work with them pretty intensely for 3-4 months and get them up to pitch night, which we also had virtually. I think that's a tremendous thing, and that's what's actually enabled us to get this large federal grant that was just announced here in February to reach out across the rest of the state and open up our program beyond the 3 centers that we were at, and to work with the community colleges. So it's had a dramatic impact in helping us understand how to use the technology to reach more people. And now that this grant's in place, we're able to hire some more people so that we're able to reach more of the state. So it's pandemic has had a major impact on Impact 307. We also rebranded during all of this. So.
Wow. Yeah. That's interesting. I think if you have one thought of encouragement for young people, what would that be?
Celebrate being wrong, because it means that it's just shortcutting the process in which you're going to be right. If you fail at something, it's totally a victory unto itself, because you know what doesn't work, so you can try something else and learn from it. I'm so inspired by our young people. They're able to grasp that and realize that you don't throw out the good to celebrate. Or what's the quote? Don't throw out the good to achieve perfection, or something like that. The good enough can be good enough in many cases. It doesn't have to be precise and perfect. You can work on that later, but that first iteration, that's fail a few times to get there. It's more fun that way.
Right. We all have to start somewhere.
Yeah, precisely.
Well, it's been great talking to you today.
Been great talking to you, Emmy.
Thanks, Fred.
Always love seeing you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us for this episode of What's Your Why? Brought to you by Wyoming Humanities with support from Wyoming Community Foundation and generous supporters like you. To learn more, go to thinkwhy.org, subscribe, and never miss a show.